Hello and welcome to Sci-Fi Mysteries. In this video, we'll be reading story from r/LetsNotMeet. The link to the stories are in the description below. Sit back and enjoy! The first story is, Apparently I Was a Desirable Child. Posted by, DanceJoeDance18.
Hey all! I'm male age 30 and a long-time Let's Not Meet lurker, and I've debated sharing this for a while. A recent post by someone else about attempted kidnapping kinda jogged my memory again, so I figured I'd share my experience. Well, two experiences. This first part I really have no solid recollection of because I was so young, but it's been a story my mom has shared with family and friends over the years, so I've heard about it many times. This would have been in the very early 90s, so I was probably 2 or 3. I don't remember this specific trip, but I do remember our routine of going grocery shopping because my mom would always stop at Wendy's and get me chicken nuggets to eat in the cart. I will also mention that my mom worked nights at this same grocery store, the now defunct Pathmark chain. Anyways, as my mom was going about her business shopping, and I was going about my business tearing up some sweet nuggies, she was approached by an older woman. As I mentioned, my mom also worked here, and while she had countless regulars that would routinely come in the store, she had never seen this woman before. Now, I don't know if this woman wasn't all there, if she had evil intentions, or was just plain lonely, but when she stopped us, it was to ask my mom if she would sell me to her. By her account, my mom said the woman was being dead serious, offering her $10,000 for me. First of all, that's a terrible deal. I'm worth way more than that. Secondly, that's creepy as fuck and you're weird as shit. Obviously, my mom turned her down, told her off, and quickly got us the hell away from her. She rushed to the manager's office to report what had happened. Remember, early 90s, no cell phones, but by the time security and/or management went to find her, she was gone. I don't recall from the retelling of the story if the police were involved. I'll have to ask my mom to see if she remembers. And I don't believe my mom ever saw her in the store again. So, luckily, I wasn't tossed up on a register conveyor belt and scanned for $10,000. Unless she did sell me, and it turns out my mom isn't my real mom. Plot twist. Experience number 2. Mid-90s. This one I remember. My mom took me and my older brother to the mall because my brother was and still is a huge sports fan, and they were having a sports card show. If you're unfamiliar, a card show consists of a ton of vendors setting up tables throughout the mall, and they sell cards, autographs, jerseys, etc., anything sports related. Because of this, the mall was a lot more crowded than usual, and having the tables all set up sort of narrowed the general walking area. So, lots of people moving through a tight space. This is an important detail. I also know it was around Halloween because I vividly remember walking with my mom and brother past a Halloween adventure store. My brother had stopped and was looking at something on one of the card show tables. However, I was too distracted by the damn Halloween store because they had all of the really awesome masks on this big wall that was visible from outside the store. Mistake number 1. I hadn't noticed that by this point, my mom and brother had walked a little further down. Not far, but maybe 15 feet away from where we initially stopped near Halloween Adventure. I guess I was still in my mask-gazing trance, in the midst of this crowded and condensed walkway, when I suddenly felt a hand holding mine. Again, I'm still not paying attention. Mistake number 2. So, this hand was pulling me, rather briskly, in the direction we had come from, which struck me as odd. Why were we going back the way we came when there's stuff we hadn't seen yet? This was the question I intended to ask my mom, finally raising my eyes to look at her. Yeah. Not my mom. Instead, when I looked up it turned out to be some woman that I've never seen before. The creepy thing is that she never once looked down at me. She's holding me by the hand, pulling me away from my mom at a fairly quick pace, and her gaze is just dead set in front of her, like this bizarre look of determination. This is what terrified me and made me realize I had to break loose ASAP. Even more unsettling? As I wiggled my hand free, her expression still never changed. She still never looked down at me. And once I got my hand free, she did not react. She never spoke a single word. She didn't try to get me again. She just kept walking, at the same brisk pace, as if nothing ever happened. Everything about her was so robotic. I ran back to my mom and brother. Again, this wasn't that far away, and it all happened in a matter of seconds, but I was scared shitless. I vaguely remember grabbing my mom and crying. At the time, I just said I was freaked out because I thought I had lost them. For whatever reason, I was afraid of getting in trouble, so I didn't bring up what happened until later. And by that time, what can you really do? It's funny though. You read all of these, Let's Not Meet stories, and it sort of has you recalling different unsettling events throughout your life, and maybe remember things you had long forgotten. You read about stalking and harassment that goes on for years, and it makes you wonder if these experiences are random, or if, for whatever reason, they were all calculated. It's thoughts like this that forced me to re-examine both of those events, and it brought me to one terrifying question. What if it was the same woman?
The next story is, Fight or Flight While I Was Walking Home from School, posted by ORP967 Snail.
Rewind back to high school. I grew up in a city. There were certain parts of this city that, if you grew up in it, you would learn to avoid. During my junior year of high school I didn't have a car or my driver's permit/license yet, so it was either the bus or walk for me. Also during my junior year, I was part of a few clubs at school that, when we met, tended to stay after school and let out around 4 p.m. Regular school usually let out just after 3 p.m. Most of the time I chose walking because I wanted to stay active. I was healthy and fit for the most part. I was always that kid that was pretty quick when I wanted to be, winning races or playing wide receiver when my friends and I played football. Anyways, I started walking home one day and decided to listen to music from my iPod Nano. Now, for those of you that had iPods back in the day, it was a blue second generation iPod Nano. Continuing to walk, I took it out of my backpack and unwound the headphones that, back then, I chose to wrap around the iPod. Because if not, they would always be in the worst tangled mess no matter how else I stored them inside my backpack. My preferred method of listening was to have one headphone in and the side towards the street I left out. I figured this would be safe just in case I should have a need to hear something like a honking car. I was wearing a hooded sweatshirt, so, with my hood off, I put the one headphone in my ear, tucked the unused headphone in my shirt collar, and threaded the iPod down my sleeve so I could control it and not have any wires obnoxiously exposed. I did all of this within a minute or two as I was walking and had my music going for the remainder of my journey home. Before I knew what was happening, two guys ran up along either side of me and asked me what time it was. As I kept walking, I responded that I didn't know, but it must have been a little after 4. The guy to my right, not on the street side, responded by saying, "Let me get that iPod though." The only visible clue I had an iPod was the one signature white iPod headphone hanging from my right ear. They must have seen me unwind it and thread it through my sleeve. I said nothing. I kept walking, but now I quickened my pace. The guy on the street side said, "Oh, you don't want to talk? All right, we got you. Keep walking. We got our spot. We coming up to it. Just keep walking." At that time they both immediately started walking slower and I lost sight of them from my peripherals. I was coming up to an intersection and the crosswalk light was red for me to cross. I started making judgments in my mind about how fast the cars were going, and if I could run through or around them. I didn't see any yellow lights, so I knew the cars wouldn't be slowing down anytime soon. Boom! My glasses flew off my face and hit the sidewalk. I quickly snatched them up and turned around to face my assailant. Both of them looked surprised that I had not gotten knocked out. They had been aiming for that sweet spot in my lower jaw, but for whatever reason, fate intervened and only my glasses were knocked from my face. Stood up to face them so quickly. Not only was I not knocked out, but I turned around to face them. In addition to surprise, they also had their fists up, ready to try again. Now, if it was just one, I might have tried to take him on. But with the both of them there, I decided not to tempt fate. Fight or flight took hold and I took off running. To this day I don't know how close I was to getting hit or run over by cars, but I wove through that intersection so fast that I hit the sidewalk on the other side and tripped. I caught myself on the traffic light pole and kept running. I ran straight into a corner store. I hid out there until I thought it was safe to continue my walk home. Fast forward to a few weeks later. Since I told everyone what happened, I've got my friends looking out for me at school. I went to the security office and they pulled out past yearbooks to see if I could identify the two guys. I couldn't. I did see the guy that threw the punch one last time. It was as I was coming home from grocery shopping. I was sitting shotgun, and we were stopped at an intersection on the same street that incident took place, but about 3 miles further up the road. I looked out the window at the kids waiting to cross the street and made eye contact with one of them. It was him. My stomach dropped to my balls and I felt my hands ball up into fists. I'm not sure why, but I thought since I was in the car, I was safe. With the car window all the way up and about 10 feet between him and the car, I slowly raised my right hand until my one-finger salute was clearly visible through the window. To top it off, I had just learned that if you say the word vacuum to somebody and they can see you but can't hear you, it looks like you just said fuck you to them. So that's what I did. I could tell by the surprised look on his face that, As the light turned green and we drove away, he made the connection and recognized me. His surprise was quickly replaced by anger and he narrowed his eyes at me. The last thing I remember seeing was him raising his empty right hand up to me and miming a gunshot at my car. I've taken self-defense classes since then and would be ready to defend myself if I ever met them again. Sorry this isn't creepy or out of the ordinary. I wasn't kidnapped. The two guys must have seen me unwind my iPod and were following me to steal it from me. They even admitted on being intent to follow me until I reached a predetermined area so they could assault me. So, bullies that tried to knock me out and jump me for my iPod, let's not meet.
The next story is, I skipped a detention hour and maybe it saved my life, posted by babetterave.
First, I want to apologize because English isn't my native language, so maybe my writing may seem odd. So, when I was in high school, I wasn't a very hard-working student. I wasn't a troublemaker, but I was an incredibly lazy girl, working just the minimum so that my parents wouldn't get angry. I've always had some kind of easiness regarding schoolwork, and never knew what it truly meant to make any efforts. So I spent all my classes drawing on my copybooks without many consequences. My junior year's math teacher, who was seen by everyone as uptight but very caring, was pretty upset about this, as were many of my previous teachers. He wanted me to work harder. I wasn't bad at math, I was around 13 or 14 out of 20. I'm French, but I assume this is like having a B or a B-, but sometimes my grades would be very low. During a teacher/parents meeting, he told my mom that I was wasting my capacities, that it was infuriating how much I was lazy. My mom then replied that she agreed with him, and that she wouldn't blame him for pushing me harder and for punishing me if it was for making me work harder. And from this day on, he did exactly what she told. In every math class, he would always question me first before everyone else, was always sitting next to me when we were doing exercises. During the test, he was always telling me, "You can do it, Elisa." It made me feel incredibly uncomfortable because at this age no one wants to be the attention's focus. My classmates started to realize that my math teacher was a little obsessed by me and were teasing me a lot about this. The last class before Christmas break, the math teacher threw a little surprise Christmas party. It was very nice, he gave us chocolates and mock champagne, we've had a lot of fun. During the party, he poured me another glass of mock champagne telling me that I deserved it because I was doing better, and it was true, because of all that attention I was forced to work so my grades were around 15 to 16, which I think is like having a A- or AA. I accepted it but didn't drink it entirely, I have diabetes and already had too much chocolate. But during the next class I was feeling very bad. I almost fainted and finished my last day of school before Christmas in the nurse's office. At that time I wouldn't even think it was because of the alcohol-free champagne, I thought this was due to my diabetes, that I indeed had too much of chocolate, even if it didn't look like my usual crisis. A few weeks later my class threw some kind of charity event, it was a class project and we were very proud. In my country we don't have proms, so it was our occasion to wear pretty formal clothes and to dance together. The math teacher was invited and he was helping some of the boys to tend the bar. He served me an alcohol-free cocktail, but before I could drink it, a classmate of mine, Flora, poured some vodka in it, even though it was forbidden to bring alcohol at the event. I was mad because with my diabetes I couldn't drink alcohol, so I told her that she could just throw the cocktail. At the time I thought she did, but now when I think about it, I wonder if she didn't choose to drink it instead. The event ended pretty badly because of the alcohol Flora have brought. Some guys were very drunk, they started breaking things, etc. And Flora passed out because of all the alcohol she had. This ended the event. Flora had been admitted to the hospital because her coma was pretty severe, and we spent the next day being lectured by all the teacher of the school. Flora got expelled from the school and never went again. I was very upset with her. Because of her, every event would now been forbidden and our project was a failure. We gave a very bad image to the association we were raising funds for, so I kind of ghosted her and never asked if she was doing better, etc. Now I feel bad about this, but at that time I was immature. But because of that I will never know if she was ill because of the alcohol, or because of my cocktail. A few weeks later, I failed a math test. It had been a long time since I failed a math test, and math teacher was very angry. He yelled at me in front of everyone, saying how much of a disappointment I was, that I was hopeless, that I would just end up living in a cardboard under a bridge. Something was off, I was feeling it. He had a very weird look in his eyes. It chilled me and I couldn't help it, I started crying. He calmed down a bit and said he would just give me an hour of detention, during which I will copy my lesson. I was a little surprised because normally, detention is for bad behavior, not for bad grades, but I was a little relieved because it was a small punishment, my parents would never know. Indeed, I lived kind of far from my high school, and there only were one bus every night between my high school and my home, at 5 p.m. Because of that, even when I finished at 4 p.m., I would never go home before 5 p.m. And when I've had detention between 4 p.m. and 5 p.m., my parents would never know. But then when he officially gave me the detention hour, he said that he wanted to be personally present during my detention hour, and that the only possible hour was during 5 p.m. and 6 p.m. I was really nervous, because I would have to tell my parents to come get me at 6 p.m., and then they would know everything. As I said earlier, I wasn't a troublemaker, so at first I planned to go to the detention hour, but during the day my friends and I talked a lot about it, and I was feeling more rebellious, because of the sensation of being supported by my friends, so I decided not to tell my parents that I was in detention, and that one of my friends would pick me up at 6 p.m. and drive me home. At 5 p.m., when heading towards the detention room, I was angry, mumbling that it wasn't fair to be in detention because of one and only bad grade. When I arrived in front of the detention room, I realized I was the only one waiting. I then realized that I would be the only student in detention, alone with that math teacher who was a little obsessive. And it was getting dark outside. It was during late winter, early spring, so the night was early. It was a big nope for me, and when I saw him coming, I panicked. I said something like, "Sorry, I have an emergency, I have to go now. I will email the school for rescheduling my detention hour," and then I ran off. He started to yell at me that I had to obey him and go to detention, that he would call my parents. At this moment I didn't care. I sprinted towards the bus stop and catched my bus in extremis. Remember, he was scheduled for 5 p.m., and went home. I was afraid that he would have called my parents, so when I arrived I was shaking, but my parents greeted me normally, so I assumed that eventually he didn't call them. He never came back the next day, nor the next weeks. Eventually I learned that he quitted his position. A shrink came during an hour to ask us if we wanted to talk about the math teacher, but as nobody knew what was going on with him, we didn't have much to say, and the shrink left, and we never heard of him again. Until a few months ago, I became a teacher. How ironic given my laziness when I was a teen, and one day, chatting with my coworker, I mentioned his name, talking about my weird, bizarre math teacher, and how I skipped a detention hour. And one of my oldest coworker went very pale hearing his name. In fact, a few days after the detention hour incident, my math teacher was arrested for having downloaded a few pedo pictures and videos from the dark web, and some kind of snuff movies starring children and young teens. Maybe this detention hour was just a detention hour and I would have gone out of it without any problem. But now I will never know and will always wonder what would have happened if I stayed there or didn't catch my bus. And sorry, Flora, maybe you were expelled because of me.
Thank you for watching my videos. And thank you to the Reddit users who let me read their story. The link to the Reddit posts are in the description below. Please go ahead and support them. And remember, like, comment and subscribe for more.